Give me the gun. The words cut through the chaos louder than the gunfire. For half a second, every man at the north gate turned toward the voice. Not because it was shouted, not because it carried rank, but because it came from the last person anyone expected to speak while bullets were tearing into the concrete barriers. Mara Cole stood in the doorway of the field kitchen. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows. A smear of flour marked one cheek. The front of her faded apron was darkened by coffee, smoke, and the morning's rush of powdered eggs. Behind her, a kettle had boiled over onto the stove, hissing like a fuse. Around her, soldiers sprinted past with ammo boxes, radios, and medical kits. She did not move with them. She stood still, eyes lifted toward the cliffs beyond the gate. The base was coming apart in pieces. The first explosion had hit just after sunrise, while most of the men were still swallowing burnt coffee and complaining about the heat. It blew the dust off the northern wall and sent a sheet of orange fire rolling over the outer checkpoint. Then came the small arms fire, fast and disciplined, snapping through the wire and punching holes through the sandbags. Within 3 minutes, the north gate was pinned. Within 5, the SEAL team assigned to hold it had lost their angle. 3 operators were crouched behind a line of concrete blocks, trapped between the gatehouse and the motor pool. Their rifles were up, their shoulders tight, their faces streaked with dust. Every time one of them tried to shift position, a single shot cracked from somewhere high and hidden. Not random fire. Not panic. A sniper. And he was good. Petty Officer Grant Voss had already tried twice to spot him through the smoke. The second time, a round chipped the concrete 2 inches from his face and sprayed his cheek with fragments. He dropped back hard, breathing through his teeth, one hand pressed against the shallow cut under his eye. Shooters got the whole gate locked, someone yelled. Where? No visual. Drone feed? Jammed. Another round snapped across the checkpoint and shattered the side mirror of a parked Humvee. Glass rained over the dirt like ice. Lieutenant Caleb Rourke, the SEAL team leader, kept his back against the concrete and scanned what little he could see of the ridgeline. He had led men through alleys, caves, ship decks, and mountain passes. He knew the sound of an amateur with a rifle, and this was not that. This shooter was patient. He was choosing who moved and who stayed down. That meant the gate was not just under attack. It was being studied. Rourke grabbed the radio from his vest. Command, this is North Gate. We are pinned by elevated precision fire. Need counter-sniper support now. Static answered him first. Then a broken voice. Negative visual. Stand by. Rourke looked at the broken gate, then at the wounded radio operator dragging himself behind a steel drum. They did not have time to stand by. That was when Mara stepped closer. Give me the gun, she said again. This time, Grant Voss turned fully toward her. Even bleeding, even half-deaf from the blast, he managed a dry laugh. Ma'am, get back in the kitchen. Mara's eyes did not leave the cliffs. I can see him. The words landed strangely. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just certain. Voss stared at her, then at the ridge. You can see who? The shooter. Another bullet struck the metal post above them, and everyone ducked except Mara. Dust fell across her hair. She blinked once. Rourke noticed that. He noticed how she did not flinch after the shot. He noticed how her gaze tracked not the sound, but the delay after it. He noticed her lips moving silently, counting something none of them could hear. Distance. Wind. Rhythm. Still, what he saw made no sense. This was Mara Cole, the cook. The woman who served oatmeal before dawn and soup after patrol. The woman who knew exactly which men took sugar, which ones skipped breakfast before missions, and which ones came back too quiet to talk. She had been on the base for 6 months, and in that time, no one had seen her carry anything more dangerous than a kitchen knife. Voss shook his head. This isn't a range lady. Mara finally looked at him. There was no anger in her face. No fear either. Only the cold focus of someone who had already made the calculation and found the answer unpleasant. No, she said. It's a kill box. The phrase changed the air around them. Rourke's eyes narrowed. Before he could speak, another shot cracked from the cliffs. A young sailor trying to reach the generator shed went flat against the dirt as the round tore through the wall beside him. Mara pointed, not at the ridge top where everyone had been looking, but lower. Much lower. Broken antenna, she said. Left side of the old relay shack. He's using the shadow under the frame. Rourke raised his binoculars fast. Smoke dragged across the cliff face. Sunlight flashed off rock. For 1 second, he saw nothing. Then he caught it. A glint so small it could have been a piece of glass. Then gone. His jaw tightened. Mara had seen it without optics. Voss followed his expression and stopped smiling. Behind them, the base alarm wailed again, long and metallic, rolling across the compound like a warning from another world. Mara stepped over a fallen tray scattered with biscuits and brass casings. She crouched beside the wounded operator's rifle, an M110 lying half under a torn sandbag. Voss reached out to stop her. "Don't touch that." Mara's hand paused above the weapon. Slowly, she looked at him. "Then pick a man who can take the shot." No one answered. The sniper fired again. This time, the round punched through the gatehouse window and knocked a framed map from the wall. The glass burst outward. Someone cursed. Someone prayed under his breath. Rourke looked from the cliff, to the rifle, to Mara. The woman in the flour-stained apron did not ask again. She simply waited. And in that silence, with the north gate bleeding dust and fire, the SEALs began to understand something terrible. The person they had ignored all morning might be the only one who could save them. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you believe in courage and respect, hit like and subscribe. These stories inspire change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Mara Cole. By the time Mara Cole reached the rifle, the kitchen behind her had gone silent. No one was stirring the powdered eggs. No one was checking the coffee urns. The two junior supply clerks who usually complained through breakfast stood frozen beside the serving table, watching the woman they knew only as Cook Cole kneel in the dirt beside a weapon meant for trained hands. Outside, the north gate kept shaking under fire. Inside Mara's head, though, another morning returned. 6 months earlier, she had arrived at Forward Operating Site Ardent in the back of a supply convoy, seated between sacks of flour and crates of canned peaches. The men unloading the trucks barely looked at her. One of them pointed at the mess tent with his thumb and said, "Kitchen's over there." That was how the base met her. Not with a briefing. Not with a salute. Just a thumb toward the stove. Mara had carried her duffel through the dust without complaint. She was 34, though the hard sun and quiet eyes made her seem older in some moments and younger in others. She had dark hair tied in a regulation knot, a narrow face, and the kind of build people overlooked in a room full of armor and muscle. There were no unit patches on her sleeve that invited questions. No medals. No stories. Just the name tape, Cole. The first week, the men tested her in the casual ways soldiers tested anyone new. They complained about the eggs. They joked about the coffee. They asked if she had joined the Navy to make sandwiches for heroes. Mara listened to all of it with the same calm expression she used when waiting for bread to rise. "Don't let them get under your skin," one older mechanic told her after breakfast one morning. Mara had looked at him, almost amused. They'd have to reach it first. The mechanic laughed, not sure whether she had made a joke or issued a warning. That became the strange thing about Mara Cole. She was polite but never soft. Quiet but never uncertain. She did not talk about herself, but she noticed everyone else. She knew which operators came back from patrol too hungry to speak. She knew which young sailors hid shaking hands by holding coffee cups with both palms. She knew that Lieutenant Rourke never ate before a mission, only after. She knew Grant Voss pretended to hate oatmeal, but took it anyway when she added brown sugar. And she knew with a precision that made some men uncomfortable when someone was lying about being fine. On base, that kind of attention was usually mistaken for kindness. It was not only kindness. It was habit. Mara moved through the mess tent like someone always mapping a room. Her back never stayed to the entrance for long. Her hands never stayed empty if a loud noise cracked outside. When helicopters passed low over the compound, everyone looked up. Mara looked for shadows moving in the wrong direction. Still, no one asked why. To them, she was the cook. A useful one. A strange one. Maybe even a respected one, in the small way hungry men respect the person who feeds them. But still just the cook. 3 weeks into her assignment, a young SEAL named Ellis tried to impress his friends by slapping a pistol magazine onto the serving counter while Mara was ladling stew. "You ever shoot one of these?" he asked. His friends grinned behind him. Mara did not look at the pistol. She kept filling bowls. "No," Ellis smiled wider. "Didn't think so." Mara placed a bowl in front of him, then finally glanced at the weapon. "But your spring is weak," she said. "And your top round isn't seated right." The smile faded. Ellis picked up the magazine, checked it, and said nothing. His friends stopped grinning. Mara moved on to the next bowl. Moments like that happened often, but they were small enough for men to explain away. A lucky guess. A little training. Maybe she had a brother who served. Maybe she watched too many soldiers clean weapons and picked up a few things. People preferred explanations that kept the world simple. Mara allowed them that comfort. At night, after the mess tent closed and the base settled into its uneasy darkness, she washed the last pans alone. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Outside, the perimeter towers cut white cones across the wire. Sometimes, when the wind came down from the cliffs just right, she would stop scrubbing and listen. Not to the obvious sounds. Not engines. Not voices. The smaller things. Loose metal ticking against a pole. Gravel shifting under a boot. A bird lifting suddenly from a fence line. Once, a guard found her standing outside the kitchen at 0217, staring toward the western ridge. "Everything okay, ma'am?" he asked. Mara waited 3 seconds before answering. "Tell Tower 2 to check their left sector." The guard frowned but radioed anyway. 5 minutes later, Tower 2 reported movement near the old drainage ditch. Nothing major. A stray dog, they said. But the next morning, fresh boot prints were found just beyond the wire. After that, the guard stopped joking when Mara looked into the dark. But even then, no one connected the pieces. They did not connect the way she sliced vegetables with a blade held close and efficient, never wasting motion. They did not connect the way she could tell distance by sound, or wind by the bend of smoke rising from the cook fire. They did not connect the way she disappeared every Sunday afternoon, walking alone past the motor pool toward the abandoned storage berm, then returning an hour later with dust on her sleeves and calm in her breathing. A cook could have secrets, they figured. Everyone at war had secrets. What they did not know was that Mara Cole's real story had been buried long before she arrived with flour sacks and canned peaches. Buried under sealed records. Buried under a medical review board. Buried under an operation no one at Ardent was cleared to read. And buried deepest under Mara's own silence. Because silence had kept her alive once. Now, at the North Gate, silence was breaking. The same men who had passed her tray without looking at her face were crouched behind concrete, waiting for a shot none of them could take. Mara wrapped her hand around the M110 and lifted it from the dirt. The rifle was heavier than she remembered. Or maybe memory had made everything lighter. Grant Voss watched her check the chamber, clear the dust from the optic, and settle the sling with a practiced motion that made his throat tighten. No cook handled a rifle like that. No amateur touched a weapon with that kind of grief. Lieutenant Rourke saw it too. He had spent his life around dangerous people. Loud ones were easy to spot. Quiet ones took longer. And Mara Cole, he realized, had been quiet for 6 months. Not because she had nothing to say. Because she had nothing to prove. Until now. The day before the attack, Mara Cole had been mocked over a rifle in the mess tent. It happened during the dead hour between lunch and evening chow, when the heat made men slow and careless. The big canvas flaps were tied open, letting dusty wind push through the rows of metal tables. Somewhere outside, a generator coughed and rattled. Inside, the smell of onions, disinfectant, and burnt coffee hung in the air. Mara was cleaning the serving counter when the armory runner came in carrying a training rifle with a red tag looped through the trigger guard. "Anyone know why this thing won't clear?" he asked, holding it up. At first, no one answered. Half the room was too tired to care. The other half was busy pretending they were not tired. Then Grant Voss leaned back on the bench and smirked. "Ask the cook," he said. "She fixes everything else around here." A few men chuckled. The armory runner, 19 years old and eager to be useful, looked uncertain. "Seriously?" Voss took a bite from an apple and nodded toward Mara. "Sure. Maybe she can season it." The laugh that followed was not cruel enough to become an incident, but it was sharp enough to be remembered. Mara turned from the counter slowly. She was holding a wet rag in one hand. Her sleeves were rolled up, and there was a small burn mark near her wrist from the breakfast griddle. She looked at the rifle, then at the young runner. "What happened?" she asked. The runner shrugged. "Bolt won't lock back. Range staff said it jammed twice during drill." Mara held out her hand. The room grew more attentive. Voss smiled wider, enjoying it now. "Careful, Cole. That's not a ladle." Mara did not look at him. The runner handed her the rifle. The first thing the men noticed was what she did not do. She did not hold it awkwardly. She did not point it somewhere stupid. She did not fumble for the safety or stare at it like a machine she did not understand. The rifle came into her hands and settled there. Natural. Quiet. Familiar. Mara angled the muzzle down and away from the room, removed the magazine, checked the chamber, checked it again, then rolled the rifle slightly so the light caught the ejection port. Her expression did not change. "Carbon buildup under the extractor," she said. The runner blinked. "You can see that from there?" "No," Mara said. "I can feel it." Voss made a low sound in his throat. "That's a good trick." Mara set the rifle on the table, pulled a small pin loose with the edge of a spoon from the counter, and worked the bolt with 2 fingers. There was a small metallic click. Then another. The jam released. No drama. No flourish. Just a problem solved. For a moment, the room was silent except for the generator outside and the low clink of a pan settling on the stove. The runner stared. "How did you clean it properly?" Mara said, handing the rifle back. "And stop forcing the bolt when it resists. Metal tells you what's wrong before it breaks. You just have to listen." One of the younger SEALs at Voss's table laughed, but this time it came out thinner. "Guess the cook watches a lot of training videos." That gave the room permission to breathe again. Voss picked up the joke, unwilling to let the silence belong to her. "Yeah, next she'll be teaching sniper school between breakfast and dinner." A few men laughed. Mara reached for her rag and returned to wiping the counter. "Sniper school has better coffee," she said. This time, no one knew whether to laugh. Voss studied her for a second longer than usual. Something in the way she had said it did not sound like a joke. It sounded like a memory that had escaped before she could stop it. But pride is a stubborn thing. And embarrassment, inside a group of armed men, often looks for someone else to punish. Voss stood and walked toward the counter with his tray. He was not a bad man, not in the way villains are bad in stories. He had carried wounded teammates. He had stayed calm under fire. He had earned his place more than once. But he also had a habit of mistaking quiet for weakness. He placed the tray down harder than necessary. "You always talk like that?" he asked. Mara rinsed the rag in a bucket. "Like what?" "Like you know something everyone else doesn't." She wrung the rag out. Water ran between her fingers. "I usually do." A couple of men at the nearest table looked up. Voss's jaw shifted. "Let me give you some advice, Cole. Around here, people respect experience." Mara looked at him then. Not sharply. Not angrily. Just fully. The kind of look that made a man suddenly aware of where his hands were, how loud he had been speaking, and how little he actually knew about the person in front of him. "Experience," she repeated. The words sounded different in her mouth. He crossed his arms. "That's right." Mara's eyes moved briefly to the rifle in the runner's hands, then to the dust drifting through the open canvas flap, then back to Voss. "Experience doesn't always announce itself," she said. Voss scoffed. "No, but it usually wears the right uniform." The room tightened. It was a small sentence, but everyone understood what he meant. Mara's apron. Her post. Her place behind the counter. The invisible line between those who went outside the wire and those who fed them when they came back. Mara folded the rag once. Then again. For the first time, something colder crossed her face. Uniforms are useful, she said. They tell strangers where to look. Voss leaned closer. And where should I be looking? Mara held his gaze. At what people do when nobody important is watching. No one laughed after that. The armory runner cleared his throat and backed toward the exit, clutching the rifle like it had become heavier. The men returned to their meals with forced casualness. Voss stared at Mara for another second, then picked up his tray. Must be nice, he muttered. Talking like a legend when all you've got to do is cook. Mara turned back to the stove. The stew was beginning to simmer. Outside, the wind shifted against the canvas walls, carrying the faint smell of hot metal from the direction of the gate. Mara looked toward the north without meaning to. Just for a second. Then she lowered the flame and reached for the salt. Behind her, Voss walked away believing he had won the exchange. Mara let him believe it. Some lessons arrived better under pressure. Some truths needed smoke, fear, and a rifle on the ground before men were ready to hear them. By sunrise, the mess tent would be half empty, the north gate would be under fire. And Grant Voss would remember every word she had said, especially the one about experience. The attack began at 0613. Mara remembered the exact time because she had just pulled the first tray of biscuits from the oven when the clock above the kitchen door trembled against the wall. At first, the sound was wrong. Not loud enough to be a direct hit. Not distant enough to ignore. A dull thump rolled through the base, followed by a silence so sudden that every cook, clerk, and mechanic in the mess tent stopped moving at once. Then the second explosion hit the north gate. The floor jumped. Flour lifted from the counter in a pale cloud. Coffee spilled over the rim of the urn. One of the junior clerks dropped a stack of metal trays, and the crash of them hitting concrete was swallowed almost immediately by the base alarm. Long metallic. Hungry. For one breath, no one moved. Then the radios started screaming. Contact, North Gate. Multiple shooters. Medic to checkpoint. Get down, get down. Men surged from the mess tent so fast that benches scraped sideways and trays flipped onto the floor. Someone shouted for body armor. Someone else yelled for ammo. The morning routine broke apart, and beneath it, the base revealed what it really was. Not a place of meals and schedules, but a machine built for violence, suddenly forced awake. Mara stood behind the serving line, one hand still wrapped in an oven mitt. She did not run. She listened. The first wave of gunfire came from outside the perimeter, low and scattered. Suppressive fire. Designed to make heads drop, not bodies. Then came the sharper sound. One rifle. Farther out. Higher. Slower. That sound changed her face. A young supply clerk beside her whispered, "What is that?" Mara removed the oven mitt and laid it on the counter. "A problem," she said. Outside, Lieutenant Caleb Rourke and his SEAL team were already moving toward the north gate. They had been halfway through breakfast when the explosions hit. Now they crossed the open ground in full kit, boots striking hard through dust and scattered gravel. Grant Voss ran on Rourke's left, rifle high, blood not yet on his face, confidence still intact. He had survived. Enough firefights to know the first minute was always confusion. After that, training took over. At the gatehouse, 2 guards were pinned behind the concrete entry block. One was shouting into a dead radio. The other had both hands pressed around his thigh, trying to stop the blood from pulsing between his fingers. Rourke slid into cover beside them. "Report." "Blast took the outer barrier," the guard gasped. 3, maybe 4 shooters beyond the wash. Then precision fire from the rocks. "Where?" The guard shook his head, eyes wide. "Can't see him." Voss leaned around the concrete for less than a second. A bullet struck the wall inches from his face. Concrete dust exploded across his cheek. He fell back hard, cursing, his hand flying to the cut under his eye. That was the moment everyone understood the gate was locked. Not surrounded. Not overwhelmed. Locked. The enemy didn't need to rush in. Not yet. They had placed one skilled rifleman somewhere above the approach, and that rifleman was controlling the entire fight. Any man who tried to reach the wounded guard would be exposed. Any man who tried to swing around the left side would cross the same invisible line. Any man who tried to climb the tower would be seen before he finished the first rung. Rourke knew the geometry of a kill zone. He was sitting in one. Smoke, he shouted. 2 canisters rolled across the ground and burst open, spilling thick gray clouds between the gatehouse and the inner wall. For a moment, it looked like enough. Then the rifle fired again. A round cut through the smoke and punched into the sandbag stack, exactly where Voss's shoulder had been a second earlier. Shooter's reading movement, Voss snapped. No, Rourke said, watching the smoke drift. He's reading wind. That made it worse. The enemy sniper was not guessing. He was calculating through distortion, timing shadows, using the base's own structures against them. Inside the compound, panic began to spread in controlled military fragments. A medic crawled toward the wounded guard, then froze when a shot struck the dirt ahead of him. The motor pool locked down. The communication shack lost half its signal. A Humvee tried to reposition near the inner road, but a round shattered its windshield before the driver made it 10 feet. The vehicle lurched sideways and stalled, horn blaring in one long useless note. And through it all, Mara moved from the kitchen doorway into the open. Not far. Just enough to see the gate. The dust hit her first. Then the heat. Then the smell of explosives, fuel, and blood. She ignored all of it. Her eyes went to the ridge where everyone else was looking. Too obvious. Too clean. Too much sunlight. A good sniper would never sit there after the first shot. Mara shifted her gaze lower, toward the broken relay shack built into the rock face beyond the perimeter road. The old structure had been abandoned for months, its antenna twisted from a storm, its frame throwing a jagged shadow across the stone beneath it. The wind-dragged smoke left. But the shots were arriving a fraction off from where the ridge angle suggested. Mara counted again. 1 shot. Echo. Stone return. Half-beat delay. Her eyes narrowed. There. Not a man. Not even a shape. Just a thin, unnatural darkness behind the fallen antenna frame. The kind of shadow that breathed. Behind her, one of the clerks grabbed her sleeve. Mara, get back. She gently removed his hand. At the gate, Rourke lifted his binoculars and scanned the ridge again. He saw rock, smoke, heat shimmer, and nothing useful. Voss wiped blood from his cheek and growled, "We need Overwatch." "Overwatch can't see him," Rourke said. "Then we move blind." "You move blind, he drops you before you stand." Another shot cracked. The medic slammed flat against the ground, trapped halfway between cover and the wounded guard. Mara's voice came from behind them. "He's not on the ridge." Every head turned. She stood 10 yards back, apron moving in the hot wind, flowers still pale on one cheek. Voss stared at her like the battlefield had just produced an insult. "What?" Mara pointed toward the relay shack. "Lower. Left side. Behind the broken antenna." Rourke followed her finger. At first, he saw nothing. Then the smoke thinned. For less than a second, sunlight touched glass where glass should not have been. A scope. Rourke's expression changed. Voss saw that change, and the sarcasm died in his mouth. Mara stepped closer to the wounded operator's fallen M110. The rifle lay in the dirt beside a torn sandbag, half covered in dust, waiting for hands steady enough to use it. The sniper fired again. The gatehouse window burst inward. Everyone ducked. Mara did not. Her eyes stayed on the shadow beneath the antenna. She had seen enough now. The angle. The distance. The wind. The mistake. She looked at Rourke, then at the rifle. "Give me the gun," she said. "Give me the gun." Mara said it once. No panic. No tremor. No wasted breath. The words hung between her and the SEAL team while the north gate rattled under fire. Smoke dragged low across the ground. The wounded guard behind the concrete barrier was still bleeding. The medic was trapped halfway to him, flat against the dirt, one arm stretched uselessly toward his aid bag. Grant Voss stared at Mara like he had not heard her correctly. Then he looked down at the M110 lying beside the torn sandbag. Then back at her apron. Even now, even with his cheek cut open and dust packed into his teeth, pride rose faster than reason. "No," he snapped. "Absolutely not." Mara did not move toward the rifle. She did not argue. She only kept her eyes on the broken relay shack beyond the wire. The hidden sniper had not fired again. That bothered her. A good shooter fired when the target exposed itself. A better shooter waited until everyone thought he had lost the angle. He's repositioning his barrel, she said quietly. Not his body. Just the muzzle. He knows you're looking now. Voss blinked. Lieutenant Caleb Rourke's head turned slightly. Mara continued, still watching the shadow beneath the twisted antenna. He has a narrow window between the left support beam and the rock shelf. If he shifts too far, he loses the gate. If he stays, he has the medic in 12 seconds. The medic heard that and went still. Rourke looked toward the open ground. The medic's boot was exposed beyond the smoke line. The wind was thinning the cover. In seconds, the man would be visible from the relay shack. Voss swallowed. You're a cook, he said, but this time the words had less force. Mara finally looked at him. The battlefield noise seemed to pull back around her. For the first time, Voss noticed her eyes were not wide with fear. They were not frantic. They were measuring. Cold, focused, familiar with pressure in a way that made his own certainty feel suddenly young. Today, she said, I'm the only one who can see him. A round cracked from the rocks. The medic jerked as dirt kicked up inches from his helmet. He flattened himself harder to the ground, breathing fast. The sniper had missed on purpose. Not because he could not hit him. Because he wanted everyone watching the medic. Mara's jaw tightened. He's baiting movement. Rourke made his decision. Voss, he said. Voss turned. Sir, give her the rifle. The words landed heavier than the gunfire. Voss stared at his team leader as if he had been ordered to hand over command itself. Lieutenant, with respect, we don't know we know what you can't see, Rourke cut in. And she can. Another burst of enemy fire hammered the outer gate. The SEALs answered from behind cover, but their rounds chewed rock and dust with no effect. The sniper remained untouched, a single patient eye behind glass and shadow. Voss looked at the M110 again. The rifle was not just a tool to him. It was trust, training, responsibility. Men had earned the right to carry weapons like that through years of pain and proof. And Mara Cole, in his mind, had earned the right to feed them. Nothing more. But the medic was still on the ground. The wounded guard was fading. And the woman in the flour-stained apron had just identified a position 5 trained operators had missed. Voss reached down, grabbed the rifle, and held it out. Not gently. Mara took it without reacting to the insult in the motion. The moment her hands closed around the weapon, the air shifted. It was subtle, but every SEAL near her felt it. She did not admire the rifle. Did not search for controls. Did not hesitate under its weight. Her left hand found the forend. Her right checked the safety, chamber, magazine, and optic with a sequence so smooth it looked less like inspection than memory. Rourke watched closely. No wasted motion. No theatrical confidence. No beginner's rush to prove herself. Mara dropped to one knee behind the ammo crate, then lowered herself fully to the dirt. The apron twisted beneath her body. Gravel pressed into her elbows. Smoke curled past her face. She ignored it. Voss crouched beside Rourke, eyes locked on her hands. She's done this before, he muttered. Rourke did not answer. Mara pulled the rifle into her shoulder and settled her cheek against the stock. The bass noise faded into layers. Machine gun bursts from the outer perimeter. Radio static from Rourke's vest. A man groaning behind concrete. Wind threading through broken wire. Her breathing. In. Out. Hold. Not yet. Through the optic, the relay shack jumped into a circle of dust and heat shimmer. The broken antenna cut black lines across the view. Rock. Rust. Shadow. Empty space. The sniper was patient. So was she. A younger SEAL behind her whispered, "She's taking too long." Mara heard him. She let the words pass. Impatience killed more shooters than bad aim ever did. She adjusted the magnification a fraction. Not much. Too much glass would trap her in the wrong detail. She needed the whole pattern. The wind pushed smoke from right to left. But not evenly. Near the gate, it moved fast. Against the rock face, it curled back, caught in a pocket where the cliff bent inward. That meant the bullet would drift less than the smoke suggested at the target and more than expected halfway through the path. She corrected without touching the turret. A hold. A memory. A debt. For one sharp second, she was not at Ardent. She was in another valley, years earlier, lying on frozen ground with blood drying inside her sleeve and a voice in her earpiece saying, "Lantern, you are cleared." She blinked once. The memory disappeared. At the relay shack, the shadow changed. Barely. A line where no line had been. The sniper was leaning into the glass. Mara's finger moved to the trigger. Voss stopped breathing. Rourke raised one hand, silently ordering everyone around them to hold fire. The battlefield narrowed. One rifle. One hidden shooter. One woman everyone had mistaken for harmless. Mara exhaled until there was almost nothing left in her chest. Then, waited for the pause between heartbeats. The glint appeared. Not even a full flash. Just a needle of light beneath the broken antenna. Mara fired. The M110 kicked once into her shoulder. The shot cracked across the gate, clean and final. Far beyond the wire, the shadow behind the relay shack snapped backward and vanished. For 1 second, no one understood what had happened. Then the enemy sniper stopped shooting. For 1 second, the battlefield did not believe her. The shot left Mara's rifle and crossed the smoke like a verdict. It struck somewhere beyond the wire, beneath the broken antenna, in a place no one had thought to look until she pointed at it. Then silence opened. Not full silence. The base was still under attack. Rifles still cracked from the wash beyond the outer barrier. Men were still shouting over radios. The alarm still wailed across the compound in long metallic waves. But the single rifle from the cliff stopped. That was the silence everyone heard. Grant Voss waited for the next precision round to cut through the gatehouse window. It did not come. Lieutenant Caleb Rourke kept his binoculars trained on the relay shack. Smoke curled across the rock face, thick and dirty, hiding everything for 3 heartbeats. Then it thinned. The glint was gone. The unnatural shadow behind the antenna no longer breathed. Rourke lowered the binoculars slowly. "Sniper down," he said. The words moved through the men like electricity. "Sniper down. Move. Move." The medic pushed up from the dirt and sprinted the last 10 yards to the wounded guard. 2 SEALs rose from cover and laid suppressive fire toward the wash. The Humvee near the motor pool roared back to life and reversed behind the inner wall, its cracked windshield glittering in the sun. The gate was still burning, but it was no longer locked. Mara did not celebrate. She rolled slightly off the rifle, checked the chamber, scanned the relay shack again, then shifted the optic toward the lower road. Her breathing stayed even. Her cheek was streaked with dust where the stock had pressed into her skin. The flour on her apron had turned gray from the dirt. Voss was still staring at her. Not at the target. At her. He had watched good shooters before. He had watched men take difficult shots under pressure. He knew the difference between luck and discipline, between instinct and training, between someone who fired a weapon and someone who understood what a bullet would do before it left the barrel. Mara had not guessed. She had solved the field. Wind. Angle. Patience. Shadow. Timing. And she had done it while half the base was falling apart around her. Rourke dropped beside her. "Can you see any more precision shooters?" Mara moved the rifle 2 degrees right. "Not precision," she said. "But 2 riflemen are using the drainage wall. One has a radio." Rourke glanced toward Voss. "Mark it." Voss snapped out of it and raised his scope. This time, he followed Mara's direction without argument. "Contact," he said. 2 shapes. Drainage wall. Mara adjusted again. "The radio man is coordinating the push. If he moves behind that culvert, you'll lose him." Rourke lifted his hand and gave the signal. The SEALs fired together. Rounds struck the drainage wall, forcing the 2 enemy fighters to break position. One dropped behind the culvert. The other stumbled back into open ground, and the outer team caught him before he reached cover. The pressure at the gate changed instantly. Enemy fire, once disciplined, became scattered. The assault team beyond the barrier had lost its eye and its voice. Without the sniper pinning movement, and without the radio man guiding timing, their attack became noise instead of strategy. Rourke heard it. So did Mara. "They're unsure," she said. Rourke nodded. "Then we take the gate back." He moved like the decision had already been made inside his bones. Voss, left side. Ellis, with me. Cover the medic. Push to the gatehouse on my signal. The SEALs moved fast now, no longer trapped in place by invisible death. They crossed the open space in violent, disciplined bursts. One man moved. Two covered. Then they switched. Dust kicked around their boots. Brass scattered across the concrete. Mara stayed low behind the ammo crate, rifle steady, watching the relay shack and the road beneath it. She did not belong in the shape they had given her. That was what disturbed Voss most. For 6 months, he had seen a cook. Now he was seeing the outline of something else beneath the apron and quiet voice. Something sealed away. Something trained hard enough to remain calm while men with tridents on their uniforms waited for her to tell them where to shoot. Another enemy fighter tried to rise near the shattered outer barrier with a launcher over his shoulder. Mara saw the movement before anyone called it. Outer barrier. Left breach. Launcher. Rourke was halfway across the open ground. He heard her and dropped flat. The launcher came up. Mara shifted, exhaled, and fired again. The round struck the weapon housing, knocking it sideways before the fighter could aim. The launcher discharged into the dirt outside the wall, throwing up a violent plume of dust and rock. The blast rolled over the gate but hit nothing useful. Voss turned toward her, stunned. Mara was already moving the rifle away. Not admiring the shot. Not waiting for praise. Working. Clear left, she said. Rourke rose and kept moving. Within 2 minutes, the SEALs reached the gatehouse. Within 4, they pulled the wounded guard behind the inner wall. Within 7, the enemy began to withdraw, dragging their dead and wounded back into the wash as base reinforcements finally arrived from the southern road. The fight did not end all at once. It loosened. One position at a time. One burst of fire at a time. One bad decision from the attackers after another. But everyone near the north gate knew the exact moment the battle had turned. It was not when reinforcements came. Not when the gatehouse was retaken. Not when the enemy started falling back. It was when the cook took the rifle. When the woman they had laughed at placed her cheek against the stock and waited for the world to become still enough for truth. By 0641, the north gate was secure. Smoke rose from the checkpoint in dark ropes. A medic worked over the wounded guard. Rourke stood near the broken wall, speaking into the radio with a voice clipped by exhaustion and dust. Voss walked back toward Mara. The rifle lay across her knees now, muzzle down, magazine removed, chamber clear. She had done everything correctly. Even after saving them, she treated the weapon not like a trophy, but like a responsibility. Voss stopped 3 feet away. For the first time since she had arrived at Ardent, he seemed unsure how to speak to her. Mara looked up. Blood had dried along his cheek. His face carried the strange expression of a man replaying every careless word he had ever said and realizing the battlefield had kept a record. "How many?" he asked quietly. Mara knew what he meant. How many shots like that? How many days behind glass? How many missions? How many ghosts? She looked past him toward the broken relay shack. Smoke hit it again. "Enough," she said. Voss nodded, but the answer did not satisfy him. It was not meant to. Rourke approached before he could ask more. His eyes moved from the rifle to Mara's hands, then to her face. "Cole," he said, voice low. "I need to know who I just handed a sniper rifle to." For the first time that morning, Mara's expression changed. Only slightly. A shadow passed behind her eyes, older than the battle, older than the base, older than the apron still tied around her waist. She stood, brushed dust from her sleeves, and handed the M110 back to Voss. "You handed it," she said, "to someone who told you the truth." Rourke did not look away. "And what truth is that?" Mara turned toward the field kitchen, where the kettle was still hissing on the stove and breakfast was burning in the pans. "That I could see him." She started walking back. Behind her, the men of the north gate watched in silence. Not because they had no questions. Because for the first time, they understood she had earned the right not to answer them. Mara Cole had almost reached the kitchen when the intelligence officer found her file. He came running from the operations trailer with a tablet in one hand and no helmet on his head. That alone made the nearest Marines turn to look. Nobody ran across an unsecured compound without armor unless the thing in his hand had scared him more than the thing outside the wire. Lieutenant Rourke. Rourke was standing near the north gate, one hand pressed to his earpiece, trying to make sense of the broken reports coming in from the perimeter. The enemy had pulled back, but not disappeared. Dust still hung above the road beyond the wire. Smoke still rose from the relay shack. The wounded guard was alive, but barely, and the medic was working over him with the hard focus of a man refusing to lose. Rourke turned as the intelligence officer stumbled to a stop. What? The officer looked past him. At Mara. She had stopped near the mess tent entrance. Her back was half-turned, one hand resting on the canvas flap, the other still blackened with rifle oil and dust. The officer lowered his voice. Sir, her record is sealed. Rourke's face did not change. A lot of records are sealed. Not like this. Grant Voss, still holding the M110 Mara, had returned to him, stepped closer. His usual sarcasm had been burned out of him somewhere between the first shot and the last. Now he only looked tired, cut, and unsettled. What does that mean? He asked. The intelligence officer swallowed. He was young, but not careless. He knew the weight of saying too much in the wrong place. Still, everyone near the gate had seen what Mara had done. Some truths were already standing in the open. It means cook coal isn't cook coal. Not originally. Mara closed her eyes for half a second. Not in fear. In recognition. As if a door she had locked years ago had just opened behind her. Rourke glanced toward the other soldiers gathering too close. Clear the area. No one moved fast enough. Now, he said. That worked. Men scattered back to their posts. A few pretended not to be listening. Most failed. Rourke stepped closer to the intelligence officer. Show me. The officer turned the tablet so only Rourke and Voss could see. Mara did not look. She already knew what was there. Most of it would be black bars. Dates without places. Assignments without names. Medical notes written around the shape of things no doctor was allowed to describe. Commendations signed by people who officially had never met her. But there would be enough. Enough to damage the quiet life she had built behind steam tables and ration crates. Enough to change every room she entered from now on. Voss read the first visible line and went still. Mara. Cole Former Attachment. Naval Special Warfare Support Element Secondary Qualification. Long-Range Precision Interdiction Operational Call Sign. Lantern. Voss looked up. Lantern, he said, almost under his breath. The name moved through the few men close enough to hear it. Not loud. Not shouted. But with the strange speed some names carry when they belong to stories nobody thought were real. One of the older communications chiefs turned pale. He had heard it before. Years ago. In a briefing room with no phones allowed inside. Rourke kept reading. Most of the missions were redacted. But the fragments that remained were enough to build a silhouette. Mountain reconnaissance. Hostage corridor denial. Counter-sniper overwatch. Extraction cover under zero visibility. A final operation marked only as incident review classified. Then the file changed. Medical hold. Psychological evaluation. Administrative reassignment requested. Non-combat billet approved. Culinary logistics. Forward operating site ardent. Voss stared at the words as if they accused him personally. 6 months. For 6 months, she had served him breakfast. For 6 months, he had made jokes about ladles and rifles. For 6 months, he had walked past a woman who had once carried a call sign spoken in sealed rooms, and he had seen only the apron. Rourke looked up from the tablet. Mara. The use of her first name felt too familiar now. Too human for the file in front of him. She opened her eyes and turned. I didn't lie, she said. No, Rourke replied. You omitted. That's how sealed records work. Voss flinched at the calmness of it. He wanted to ask why. Why leave that world? Why hide in a kitchen? Why let men have her experience laugh at her? Why stand there every morning pouring coffee for people who never knew they were looking at a ghost? But when he looked at her face, the questions died. There was no shame there. Only fatigue. The kind that did not come from one battle, but from surviving too many and then being asked to explain why survival changed you. Rourke handed the tablet back to the intelligence officer. Who else knows? Command will now, the officer said. The shot triggered a review request. Her ballistic entry matched a restricted training profile. Sir, there are people asking how a culinary logistics specialist just neutralized an elevated sniper through smoke without a spotter. Mara gave a faint, humorless breath. Tell them the biscuits were delayed. No one laughed. Not because it was not funny. Because they finally understood her restraint had never been weakness. The radio on Rourke's vest crackled. Northgate, be advised, ISR confirms enemy withdrawal from Wash. Possible second element moving east. Maintain readiness. Rourke answered, then looked back at Mara. We may not be done. Mara nodded once. I know. The old ease had vanished. The gate no longer felt like a place where a cook had helped during an emergency. It felt like a battlefield that had accidentally revealed one of its buried weapons. Voss stepped forward. He held out the M110. This time, there was no shove in the gesture. No arrogance. Both hands. Muzzle down. Respectful. Mara looked at the rifle, then at him. You might need this again, Voss said. His voice was quiet enough that only she could hear the apology inside it. Mara did not take the rifle immediately. For a moment, she looked toward the kitchen. The canvas flap moved gently in the hot wind. Inside, breakfast had burned. Coffee had gone cold. The ordinary life she had chosen waited for her like a room after a storm. Then she looked toward the eastern road. Dust was rising there. Not much. Just enough. Her face changed again, the way it had before the first shot. The softness disappeared. The silence sharpened. Rourke saw it and followed her gaze. What do you see? Mara reached for the rifle. This time, when her hand closed around it, no one questioned whether it belonged there. Movement east of the Wash, she said. They're not retreating. Voss raised his own weapon and turned toward the road. Rourke signaled the remaining SEALs back into position. The intelligence officer backed away, tablet clutched uselessly to his chest, as if paperwork could explain what was happening in front of him. Mara stepped past Voss and knelt behind the concrete barrier where he had been pinned minutes earlier. The apron was still tied at her waist. The flour was still on her cheek. But no one saw the cook now. They saw the way her breathing slowed. They saw the way the rifle settled. They saw the woman beneath the file, beneath the silence, beneath every careless assumption they had made. Rourke crouched beside her. Lantern, he said, testing the call sign with caution. Mara's eyes stayed in the scope. For a second, she did not answer. Then, in a voice so low it almost vanished beneath the wind, she said, that name cost people. Rourke absorbed that. Then nodded. Mara, then. Her finger rested outside the trigger guard. Better. The eastern dust line widened. The second enemy element was coming in low, using the Wash as cover, counting on the base to still be confused from the first assault. They were wrong. Mara saw them. And this time, the SEALs believed her before she fired. The second assault died before it reached the gate. Not because the enemy lacked courage. Not because the base had suddenly become stronger. But because this time, someone was watching the road the way it needed to be watched. Mara Cole lay behind the concrete barrier with the M110 steady against her shoulder, the apron still tied around her waist, its edge pressed into the dirt beneath her. The heat rising from the ground blurred the eastern Wash, turning men into shadows and shadows into doubt. But Mara knew the difference. 3 moving low, she said. 1 radio. 1 launcher. 1 rifle. Rourke repeated it into his mic without questioning her. East Wash, 3 contacts. Radio, launcher, rifle. Shift fire right. The SEALs adjusted as one. Grant Voss moved to Mara's left, not in front of her now, not between her and the rifle, but beside her, covering her blind side. Watching the angle she could not watch while she watched the one no one else could see. It was a small thing. It meant everything. The first enemy fighter rose near the dry culvert, trying to signal the others forward. Voss saw him half a second after Mara did. "Radio man," she said. "I've got him," Voss answered. He fired. The target dropped back behind the dirt wall, his radio skidding into the open. Mara shifted to the launcher. The man carrying it was smarter than the first. He stayed low, crawling through broken scrub, using the drainage cut to hide his shoulders. Only the tube showed once, just for a heartbeat. It was enough. Mara fired. The round struck the rock beside the launcher and showered the man with fragments. He flinched, lost his grip, and the weapon rolled down the shallow slope into full view. Rourke's team took it from there. 2 bursts. Controlled. Final. The eastern push collapsed into dust and confusion. For the next 4 minutes, the firefight became smaller, then thinner, then distant. The attackers pulled away from the wash in pairs, dragging what they could, abandoning what they could not. Base reinforcements arrived from the motor pool with heavier weapons and fresh bodies. The perimeter towers regained communication. A drone finally came back online, too late to save the gate, but just in time to confirm what Mara had already known. The enemy was retreating. At 0658, Rourke gave the order to hold fire. The north gate exhaled. Men who had been pressed flat against concrete slowly rose. Medics moved openly now. The wounded guard was carried toward the aid station, pale but alive, one hand gripping the medic's sleeve as if letting go might return him to the dirt. Smoke drifted through the wire. Brass covered the ground. The relay shack beyond the perimeter sat quiet beneath the broken antenna, no longer a mystery, no longer an eye watching them. Mara lowered the rifle. Her shoulder ached. Not badly. Just enough to remind her of old days, old shots, old costs. She removed the magazine, cleared the chamber, checked it twice, and placed the weapon across the ammo crate with the muzzle pointed away from everyone. The movement was automatic. Respectful. Final. Then she stood. The apron, once white, was gray with dust. The flour on her cheek had mixed with sweat. There was a scrape along one elbow where the gravel had cut her through the sleeve. No one spoke. That was the strange part. A base full of soldiers, SEALs, mechanics, guards, clerks, and medics had all just watched a cook turn the battle. They had seen her call targets through smoke. They had seen her red wind over burning concrete. They had seen her place shots that turned a collapsing gate into a defended line. And when it was over, none of them knew what to say. Mara solved the problem for them. She turned toward the mess tent. "Breakfast is ruined," she said. A few men looked at one another, unsure if they were allowed to laugh. Then the wounded radio operator, still sitting with a bandage wrapped around his shoulder, gave a weak breath of laughter. It broke the spell. Not fully. Just enough for men to become human again. Mara walked back toward the kitchen without waiting for permission. Boots, radios, and stretchers moved around her. This time, people stepped aside before she reached them. Not because of rank. Because of recognition. Inside the mess tent, the damage looked almost insulting in its ordinariness. Trays on the floor. Coffee spreading beneath the urn. Burned eggs crusted to the pan. Biscuits gone hard in the cooling oven. A ladle lay near the entrance where someone had dropped it during the first explosion. Mara picked it up. For a moment, she simply held it. The metal handle was warm. Heavier than it should have been. Then she set it in the sink and turned off the stove. Behind her, Grant Voss entered the tent. He stopped just inside the flap. Outside, he had known where to put his hands. On a rifle. On a wall. On a wounded man's vest. In a fight, he understood himself. Here, in the kitchen, with Mara washing smoke from her fingers, he looked lost. "Coal," he said. She did not turn around. The water ran black into the drain. "Mara," he corrected. That made her pause. Voss took another step in. His voice had none of its old edge now. No grin. No performance for the men behind him. "I was wrong." Mara shut off the water. The tent seemed very quiet. He swallowed, then forced himself to continue. "Yesterday. This morning. Every time I opened my mouth and decided what you were before I knew anything about you." Mara dried her hands on a towel. Still, she did not turn. Voss looked at the rifle oil on her sleeve, the flower on her apron, the old scar near her wrist. Details he had seen before and never read correctly. "I'm sorry," he said. Mara turned. Then, her face was calm, but not soft. "Don't apologize because I can shoot." Voss held her gaze. "Apologize because you thought I couldn't." The words struck harder than anger would have. Voss nodded once. Not quickly. Not to escape the moment. To accept it. "Yes, ma'am." This time, the word was different. Mara heard it. So did the men standing just outside the tent, pretending not to listen. For months, "ma'am" had been routine. A military courtesy. Sometimes even a joke wrapped in politeness. Now it carried weight. Earned weight. Mara looked at Voss for a long second. Then she picked up a clean towel and tossed it to him. He caught it by instinct. "Wipe that blood off your face," she said. "You're scaring my clerks." A small, embarrassed laugh moved through the men outside. Voss touched the dried cut on his cheek, as if he had forgotten it was there. "Yes, ma'am," he said again. Mara turned back to the stove. "Coffee's gone cold." Rourke appeared at the tent entrance, helmet under one arm, dust covering his uniform. His expression carried exhaustion, gratitude, and something more careful than curiosity. "Can it be reheated?" he asked. Mara lifted the coffee pot and looked inside. "Coffee, yes," she said. "Trust, no." Rourke accepted that without defense. He stepped into the tent and stood straighter than before. "Then we start with coffee." Mara studied him. Outside, the north gate smoldered. Men moved through smoke and sunlight, repairing wire, counting ammo, carrying the wounded, and speaking in lower voices than they had before. The base had survived. But something else had changed too. Not in the reports. Not in the casualty list. In the way men looked toward the kitchen. In the way they stopped before speaking. In the way silence around Mara Cole no longer meant dismissal. It meant respect. She poured the first reheated cup into a dented metal mug and handed it to Rourke. Then another to Voss. Then another to the young clerk whose hands were still shaking. No ceremony. No speech. Just coffee after a battle. But every man who took a cup received it with both hands. As if accepting something more than heat and caffeine. As if the woman behind the counter had given them back the gate, the morning, and a lesson they should have learned long before bullets forced them to listen. By noon, the north gate looked different. The blast scars were still there. The outer barrier was split open where the first explosion had struck. The gatehouse windows were gone, replaced by sheets of plywood and strips of tape. Sandbags lay torn across the ground, spilling pale dust over brass casings and dark stains no one had had time to wash away. But the gate stood. That mattered. In war, sometimes standing was enough. Mara Cole watched from the mess tent as engineers worked under the white heat of the afternoon sun. They moved with the quiet anger of men repairing something the enemy had touched. Wire was stretched. Concrete blocks were dragged into place. A new antenna was bolted to the roof of the checkpoint. Every hammer strike carried a message. Not again. Inside the kitchen, the rhythm had returned in pieces. Water boiling. Knives against cutting boards. Coffee warming on the stove. Trays sliding into place. It was not normal exactly. Normal had burned away with the morning smoke. But soldiers were practical people. They could be shaken, wounded, humbled, and still be hungry by noon. Mara stirred a pot of soup with slow, even movements. Her shoulder ached from the rifle. Her elbow stung from the gravel. Her hands smelled faintly of soap, onions, and gun oil no matter how many times she washed them. No one mentioned the file. No one said lantern. That was Lieutenant Rourke's doing. After the second assault broke, he had pulled the team aside near the damaged gatehouse and spoken quietly enough that Mara could not hear the words. She did not need to. She knew command tone when she saw it. She knew the shape of an order being given without drama. By the time the men came back through the serving line, none of them asked about her sealed record. They only stood straighter. That was worse in some ways. Questions could be answered or ignored. Respect had to be carried. Grant Voss came through last. The cut on his cheek had been cleaned and taped. Dust still clung to the edges of his uniform. He held his tray with both hands and stopped in front of the counter like a recruit waiting inspection. Mara looked up. "Soup," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She filled his bowl. He did not move away. Behind him, 3 men pretended not to notice. Voss glanced toward them, then back at Mara. His throat worked once. "I told Ellis and the others what I said yesterday." Mara set the ladle down. "Why?" "Because they laughed when I said it." He looked at the counter, ashamed but steady. "And because they needed to know it wasn't funny anymore." Mara studied him for a long second. Outside, a hammer struck metal. Once, twice, 3 times. "Humiliation is not the same as accountability," she said. Voss nodded. "I know. Do you?" He met her eyes. "I'm trying to." That answer did not fix what had been broken. But it did not pretend to. Mara picked up the ladle again and added a second scoop to his bowl. "Eat before it gets cold." Voss looked down at the bowl, then back at her. "Yes, ma'am." He stepped aside. At a nearby table, Ellis sat with his coffee untouched between his hands. He was the young SEAL who had joked about Mara teaching sniper school between breakfast and dinner. He had been laughing then, loud enough for the whole tent to hear. Now he could not seem to look at her directly. Mara let him have his discomfort. Not every silence needed rescue. The afternoon passed slowly. Reports moved up the chain. Medics stabilized the wounded. Intelligence teams searched the relay shack beyond the perimeter and found the enemy snipers hide exactly where Mara had said it would be, low behind the broken antenna, cut into shadow, with a narrow field of fire that turned the gate into a trap. The discovery traveled through the base faster than official communication. By evening, everyone knew. The cook had seen what the drone missed. The cook had taken the shot. The cook had saved the gate. But stories have a dangerous way of making people smaller than the truth. By sunset, some men were already turning Mara into a legend because legends were easier to handle than guilt. A legend did not need an apology. A legend did not need to be understood. A legend could be admired from far away without forcing anyone to change up. Close. Mara had no interest in becoming one. When dinner began, she stood behind the counter as usual. No announcement. No medal. No speech. Just sleeves rolled to the elbows and steam rising between her and the line of tired men. Rourke came in near the end of the meal. He waited until the tent thinned before approaching her. For once, he carried no radio in his hand. "Command wants a statement," he said. Mara wiped the counter. "They can read the report. They want yours. They want lanterns." Rourke did not deny it. Mara folded the towel once, then again. "That name belongs to people who didn't come home." The words were not dramatic. That made them heavier. Rourke's face changed slightly. He understood enough not to ask for details. "What should I tell them?" he asked. Mara looked out through the open tent flap. The north gate was framed in orange evening light now. Men moved along the repaired barrier, smaller against the mountains than they had seemed that morning. The same cliffs that had hidden death at sunrise now glowed like rusted steel. "Tell them Cook Cole was where she was assigned," Mara said. "And when the gate needed help, she helped." Rourke nodded slowly. "That's all. That's enough." He almost smiled. Not because it was simple. Because it was exactly the kind of answer he expected from her now. Before he left, he paused. "For what it's worth, the men are asking who should take first watch tonight." Mara glanced at him. "And?" "They asked if you wanted to choose the sectors." For the first time all day, something close to warmth touched her eyes. Not pride. Not victory. Something quieter. Trust offered without performance. "Tower 2 watches the drainage ditch," she said. "Tower 1 keeps a lower angle on the relay shack. Nobody stares at the ridge just because it looks dangerous." Rourke nodded. "Understood. And rotate the young ones before they get brave from being tired." This time, Rourke did smile. "Yes, ma'am." He turned to leave, then stopped when Mara spoke again. "Lieutenant." He looked back. "Make sure Voss takes a meal to the gate guards before his watch." Rourke's smile faded into something more respectful. "You still feeding them?" Mara returned to the stove. That was always the job. Night settled over Arden slowly. The base lights flickered on one by one. The mountains became black shapes against a violet sky. At the north gate, men stood watch with new attention in their posture. They checked the lower rocks, the drainage line, the shadows beneath broken structures. They did not just look anymore. They observed. In the mess tent, the last dishes were washed. The final coffee pot was emptied. The clerk swept the floor in quiet lines, careful around the place where Mara had stood that morning and said the sentence none of them would forget. "Give me the gun." Later, when the tent was nearly dark, Mara stepped outside with a mug of coffee and stood facing the repaired gate. Voss was there, handing food packets to the guards as ordered. He saw her and gave a small nod. Not exaggerated. Not guilty. Just honest. Mara returned it. That was enough. Beyond the wire, the relay shack sat silent beneath the stars. The broken antenna had been removed. The shadow was gone. But Mara knew shadows always came back in different places. That was why discipline mattered. That was why humility mattered. That was why respect could never be demanded loudly enough to become real. It had to be earned. In kitchens. At gates. Under fire. In the moments when no one important seemed to be watching. And in the moment when everything depended on seeing clearly. By morning, some would still call her Cook Cole. Mara did not mind. A title was just a sound people used when they thought they knew you. What mattered was different now. When she walked through the base, men stepped aside not because she frightened them, and not because a sealed file had made her famous. They stepped aside because they remembered the gate. They remembered the smoke. They remembered the woman in a flour-stained apron who had seen the hidden threat before anyone else did. And they remembered that when the North Gate was falling, respect did not arrive with a speech, a rank, or a demand. It arrived with steady hands, a quiet voice, and one shot that told the truth.